I have a couple of clips here today that try to illuminate some of the reasons that universities are such a breeding ground for a culture that insists they are oppressed and victims of society. The first is a clip from an interview with Jordan Peterson. A link to the full interview is provided in the description.
That's the fundamental claim of postmodernism. Value systems should be dispensed with because they cause oppressor and oppressed. But the problem with that is that without a value system, you have nothing to live for. There's no value in anything. It eliminates your responsibility if you don't have a value system, so that's a plus. But without up and down, there's no movement up. There's no motive force forward. There's nothing positive to push back against the suffering that's intrinsic in life. And of course, the postmodernists also don't take into account the fact that value hierarchies or power structures, for that matter, can be predicated on competence, not just oppression, competence and ability, and skill and talent and beauty and all sorts of things that seem to be intrinsically worthwhile. And also that there's a multiplicity of value structures within a complicated society like ours. So even if you are oppressed by one standard, which is almost certainly to be the case, you know, because you're too ugly or you're too fat or you're too stupid or you're, you know, or your skin color disadvantages you or you're estranged sexually, or like there's an indefinite number of ways that you don't measure up and that society is somehow set against you with a critical eye. But then there's a very large number of games you could play, and just because you're a loser in one of them or two of them or 10 doesn't mean you have to be a loser in all. And the postmodernists don't take that into account. They consider the value structure, that's the patriarchy, and it's universally oppressive, and all the victimized people are the same. It's like, no, they're not. It's wrong. It's foolish. It's unidimensional. It's low resolution. It's pseudo-intellectual. And it's absolutely, it dominates the universities because you can learn it in about a week. You sound like an intellectual to outsiders, and you don't have to do any work, any real thinking. Perfect solution.
This next clip is taken from Sam Harris's podcast with Jonathan Haidt. He offers some insight again into what may drive the attitude of being a victim and how being offended by something gets conflated with being assaulted.
Political correctness is not new. Even back in the 60s, there were all kinds of things you could not say. There was a big wave of it in the early 1990s and hate speech codes, all that sort of stuff. What's new is the idea that students or people, but especially students, are so fragile that if they're exposed to something that is an offensive idea, they will be traumatized, they will be damaged. And that wasn't there in the 90s. In the 90s, the idea was this is an incredible injustice, you're a bad person for saying this, you're a bad person for studying this, but there wasn't the idea that, oh, you've traumatized people, you've damaged people. So that's new, the idea of fragility. And this grows out. I've learned a lot since Lukianoff and I wrote the Atlantic article. This ultimately seems to grow out of the massive changes in child rearing that happened in the United States after the early 1980s. So if you were born before about 1975, then you had a childhood like people all over the world have always had, which is that you spent a lot of time without adult supervision. And sometimes you got in fights, sometimes you got lost, sometimes you got scared, and you'd figure it out yourself. But we had a real crime wave beginning in the 70s, and there were several high-profile abductions, especially Etan Patz, 3 blocks south of where I'm sitting right now in Greenwich. Yeah. And right around the time of Etan Patz, just after that, we get cable TV. And once we get cable TV, we have constant 24-hour coverage of every child abduction. So even though pretty much nobody abducts children other than the non-custodial parent, Americans came to fear that if they ever had kids unsupervised, those kids would be abducted. It is literally illegal to let your 8-year-old walk to a park 2 blocks away. You can be arrested for doing that. So parents don't do that. Kids are never without adult supervision until they're mid-teens in many cases. And so what happens is students get to college and they have not had a chance to really deal with setbacks and even insults on their own. There's always been some authority that they should appeal to. So they get to college and somebody says something. Maybe somebody criticizes affirmative action, and that hurts. They don't like it. So what do? They have this whole ideology built for them. They might even have encountered it before college that says that they are a victim of microaggression. Somebody, perhaps a professor, although professors are always on the left, so it might not have been, it's probably more a student. Most of the complaints are actually about students. So some student said something and it hurts. And so you don't say something back, you go straight to the dean. or the diversity administrator. You file charges. So this is what's new. This didn't happen 10 or 15 years ago. This is just the last couple of years. They call it accountability. They say we need to hold professors accountable for what they say. But when everybody in the class is holding the professor accountable for not making them feel bad, I mean, it's like being back in, communist Romania or East Germany. You're speaking to the Politburo, and if you say anything out of line, you're in big trouble.
Protesters and demonstrators that try to claim they are fighting for the oppressed in our patriarchal, white supremacist society miss an understanding or appreciation for diverse and complex structures. They want to make other people responsible for not offending them in any way. As a result, they lose the diversity of opinions that are able to challenge their own beliefs. They live in a world of confirmation bias and report or protest against opposing views instead of debating and really criticizing them in a valuable way. You see this often in how Jordan Peterson is so often misrepresented by anyone who dislikes him. Remember, like and subscribe, but most importantly, leave comments and engage with others. Open discussion is always needed. If you have nothing valid to say,
ZeroFox given.